Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today I am here with Ollie. Welcome, Ollie.
Thanks, Cade. It's great to be here.
It is a treat to have you here. You are a prolific designer, a font of creative energy that I am excited to spend some time with. We're going to dive into a couple different things today, but where shall we start?
I guess we should start with Creatureless. That's kind of where it all really began in a way. I've been playing Magic for like 5 years ish. I guess six. We're coming up on six now. I started really playing a lot of Limited when Eldraine came out. Didn't really get into Cube until COVID happened, when I went from playing Limited every single week to having to play on Arena and not really feeling it in the same way.
Yeah. Losing the human touch for that season certainly changes how you engage with the game.
Right, right, and so it was like, okay, well, what else is there? I can't play EDH. I got like a little webcam, but even that wasn't the same. There's a certain magic to in person magic, and so I got into Cube a little bit. I built a like commander cards that aren't good enough to be in my commander decks anymore. Cube with like cards that I owned, and then I started drafting online, and just was like, wow, Cube is this fantastic thing. So the Creatureless Cube was my first actual like cube that I was proud of that I built in paper, intentionally started from a list online. And that kind of got me where I am today. So the idea for Creatureless was that this is after lockdown a little bit. This is like 2022, 2023. I had this moment in a game where one of my local playgroups, they love your traditional type cubes where you're playing cheap interactive spells and you're attacking and it's just classic magic. It's just like quintessential magic. So I found myself playing a game of this and being like, wow, I'm not actually having fun here. I looked at my deck. I had one win con. It was Jace Wielder of Mysteries or whatever the self mill Jace is. And I'm just like, wow, I wish I had more time to actually get close to my win con. I'm gonna go 0-3 today, and it's kind of a bummer, and I just wish that I had time to, like, make something rather than play 1 drop, play a 2 drop, turn the 1 drop sideways, play a 3 drop, turn the first 2 cards sideways, and so I started playing around with the idea of what would Magic look like without creatures, like, we have a Perch of the Second Sun, we have Jace, we have whatever else you can win with,
Is it
and
Happily Ever After? I don't remember if it's in that one. In this, pardon me,
yeah,
in this one.
happily ever after, there's, like, Coalition Victory, there's some, like, really bad cards, right? Um, but there just A, weren't enough alternate win cons, and B, I think Storm has to go in that cube, and I don't think anything really challenges Storm there. The whole thing about
Mm.
Storm is that you're, like, under pressure. So it ended up going from a cube with no creatures to no creature spells.
So this is really interesting. I want to double back to an idea you mentioned here, and maybe you didn't phrase it exactly this way, but I like how you turned an experience that you described as not being fun into inspiration for a different project. So rather than just like taking your ball and going home, that maybe it was a challenge of sorts to to make something more interesting for yourself.
Yeah, I think I'm the kind of person who is very, like, I'm prone to being grumpy, especially when playing games. Like, I love playing games, but it's really easy for me to just be like, "Oh, this game is imbalanced or boring or whatever," and just kind of like pick up my toys and go home. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, "Okay, let's be constructive, right?" Like, if I'm going to like even validate my own experience to say that it actually is a problem with the game and not my bad luck or my playstyle or whatever, I need to be able to articulate what exactly I would rather be doing or what I would change. So rather than just saying, like, oh, this sucks, I hate it, I'm not playing anymore, it is, these are the things I wish I could be doing, or I tried to do this and it wasn't supported. And I think that also kind of plays into giving people feedback on their cubes a lot too. And I think that's just a better way to approach not jiving with something in terms of game design.
Is that difficult with a game as broad as Magic, where there's such a spectrum of experiences to have to approach that open-handedly?
Yeah, I think I find that a lot with my cubes. I wasn't expecting to jump into like my version of cube design so early, but I guess one thing that's kind of quintessential about me and the way I play games, the way I design cubes, is that in games I always want to do the clever thing, the tricky thing, the conniving thing. Like one of the things that got me into Magic that like hooked me on EDH when I was not actually excited to play it was learning about mill as a win con. I was like, wait,
Yeah.
I don't have to attack you. This is so cool. I can like if I can defend you or sidestep your attacks or use your own motion against you or do whatever and just like survive long enough, I can like win in this sneaky way. Like, oh, absolutely.
And it feels like you've somehow outsmarted them.
Yeah, and yeah, I just love being able to play these like strategies where you're almost going diagonal instead of straightforward, where the game is set up to do a thing and you just kind of subvert that and you're still playing the game. It's like I do this with open world games. Whenever I play an open world video game, I'm always like, they're like, go talk to the farmer. He has a rat problem in the basement. And I just like,
The multiverse-wide rat problem.
yeah, right. So I just like turn 180 degrees and I'm like going past the warning signs that are like, don't go here. There's wolves on this ridge. I'm like, screw that. Like, come and get me, wolves. Like, I'm going to sneak around these wolves and I'm going to get to whatever you don't want me to do. And I think that is just like how I've always approached games. And that is kind of what I'm trying to do when I build cubes often too. So to tie this back into the original question, when I get feedback on my cubes or when I'm talking about card evaluation or other people's cubes or these other things, it's almost like we're talking a different language sometimes
Mm.
because I don't really enjoy playing the type of Magic that a lot of people are here to play. And I want to play this weird stuff and sometimes I'm like, do I just want to play a different game? And it's like, no, I do want to play Magic, but I want to play it in these different ways, in ways that you can't get anywhere else. And I think that's what's so cool about Cube. Like there's so many really fantastic cubes out there that just do something different, like Companion Cube. I've always wanted
Sure.
to play Aether Vial, and I just can't. As somebody who came in at 2019 and it has no interest in Constructed, I'm just never going to play Aether Vial. But like, there I could. I played Counterbalance there. I've played 100 Ornithopters, and there's just like Lone Cube. There's so many unique and different things that you can do in Cube that take these pieces of cardboard that we all know generally what they do and this rule set that we all understand and just like does something new with it. And I think that is what's so exciting to me about Cube.
Maybe a strange way to word this, but, like, with a passion for the diagonal approach, do you find it difficult to market or to share some of those ideas with other players who may have a more traditional appetite for Magic?
Yes, I do. I found myself saying a lot at conventions for a while because Creatureless Cube just happened to be this like really well received thing. It's something that I put a lot of love into, so I'm glad that people are excited about it, we're excited about it, and enjoy it. So something that I would say a lot when I would play it at conventions, when people would sit down and go, "Oh, the cube creators in this pod, uh-oh," I would go, "Hey, well, I've never 3-0'd this because I have no self-control around this cube. I just want to do the weirdest thing possible. But also, I never get to play it at home. I only get to play it at conventions." And people like viewed that with some amount of skepticism. But the reality is that like for a long time I was able to like do playtesting of this cube and people who played it were like, "Ooh, that sucked." Like the first iteration was not good. And so it was hard to get groups together to be able to play it. Recently, like the past year or so, I've finally been able to get pods going in Boston. So it's been nice to actually play test it rather than just like making a ton of changes convention to convention or event to event, I should say. But even in my local play group, it's hard to get people to buy into this stranger version of Magic, because really that's the through line with all of my cubes, is that there's like this radical recontextualization, and just I want you to see, something as familiar as Snapcaster Mage and have to go, wait, is this the Snapcaster that I know? Like, let me
Mm.
consider it in this cube. And that's not like a, oh, haha, I secretly undersupported instant and sorceries in this cube, but just like, oh, for this environment that is built in this way or with this restriction or whatever, is this card better or worse than it normally is?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Before we get too far afield here, I realize I don't know that we've given a, a clear overview of what the Creatureless Cube is. We've kind of alluded to it, and the title does, like, it says it right there on the box. But what? Give us the overview, the elevator pitch for the Creatureless Cube.
Yeah, we kind of put the cart before the horse there.
In fairness, like I said, the title is very helpful here to make sure we're close.
Yes, branding is really important, folks. Branding for cubes is really, really important. So, Creatureless Cube is a cube with no creature spells. Most, if not all, decks end up making some amount of creature tokens. And the goal is really to build something cool. The goal is to build some sort of engine that will propel you toward the end of the game. I have intentionally tried my best to avoid putting in cards that you could consider good stuff. Especially 5-color good stuff has been something that I've monitored from day one. I wanted to make sure that there was no 5-color good stuff deck. Something that I kind of put to the test recently as I doubled up on shocks in the cube and made the fixing better. And it paid off. So that kind of like speaks to the fact that it is at its core very synergy driven, engine driven, and there are just kind of like a lot of ways to achieve that goal, right? There are small game decks that are really aggressive with 1/1s and want to just push through damage and a lot of pinging. There are, enchantment based decks that flicker themselves. There's enchantment based decks that are almost like Reanimator. There's ramp decks. There's a land ramp deck. There's artifact ramp. There's turn all your artifacts into 5/5s. There's really like there's so many things you can do now. There's like storm and life gain, and there are a lot of different strategies. And my goal with Creatureless, one of them, at like a kind of a secondary goal, is that I want people to sit down to their pack one, pick one, look at their pack, and just hear like, "Oh, I love this card," or "That card's in here."
And there are a lot of those.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so, and I always tell people like when I'm sitting down to draft it, whether it's at an event or just for fun, I say like pick that card. If you pick that card, you will not be disappointed. My goal in building this is to not mislead anybody in any way. That's really one of my like main goals in any cube. So if you see a card and you're like, "Ooh, I wish I could build around that." I always see that in cubes that it's never good enough. Like it's in here for a reason, my friend. Like take that card.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to do too, to make sure that there aren't any traps.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes in line with what I want to be doing with the cube, where I don't want big archetypes where it's like, okay, I'm drafting the artifact sick. Like, there is a general texture to some of the decks. You can see similarities. If you look at all of the decks, say from CubeCon, you can pick out some similarities, some constellations of things that people frequently do. But I don't want people to have to sit down and draft decks, right? Like, I think everybody has designed their first cube with those like limited retail magic signposts where it's like these colors do this, those colors do that.
It's blue, white, blink. It's black, red, sacrifice. It's
Yeah. And so I think the reason why in my cube you'll find some of those similarities is because of the color pie, right? Like certain colors only have access to certain effects and other colors can't do that. So you'll find a density of certain effects in certain colors. But I don't want people to generally think about it like, oh, I opened this card. I want to force this archetype. I want people to kind of see it as a choose your own adventure book kind of thing and have cards that go in multiple directions or do multiple things. And so rather than having like these big supported archetypes, by taking creatures out of the equation, I almost open myself up more to be thinking about these like higher order things about cube. that end up being really neat and just allow the drafter to kind of like express themselves.
That is funny to think of creatures as a distraction in a way of like when you don't have that pressure, or maybe you don't have that, I don't know, that side of the game that you're able to think about the other portions in a more open way.
Yeah, and I think it's a real thing that people don't actually think about unless you've designed a cube like this before. One of the cool things about Creatureless is I had an epiphany recently that there were certain effects that I didn't want to grant access to in certain colors. So I'm in effect creating my own color pie within Creatureless based on creature sizing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the really good examples of this is Formless Genesis. I don't know if you know this card. It's the 2 and a green, create an XX colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and Death Touch, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard retrace. So there are a lot of effects that both put lands into your graveyard and ramp you and create creature tokens and all sorts of things in this cube. And what was in here previously was Worm Harvest, of course. Worm Harvest is better costed for my cube. I think like being able to make a bunch of creature tokens should be at 5 mana, and creating one creature token feels like 3 mana. But what was really cool about it is that green is the color that has really bigger than 2/2 in this cube. Like 2/2 is like a good sized creature. Anything bigger, you almost have to be in green for. So the fact that I could take Formless Genesis and swap it in for Worm Harvest, where I'm not making a bunch of 1/1s in green because that felt a little bit strange, but instead making this one big creature. I'm like, okay, that feels more with big air quotes in pie for creatureless. There's a couple exceptions here and there, but without being spoiled for the amount of options that I have to make creatures, right? Because I can't run creatures, I have to reconceptualize how I treat creatures in this cube. And as such, creature sizing is something that I actually have the luxury to care about, which a designer of a limited set would care about. You know, there's a lot of talk about like 3/2 formats and 2/3 formats and stuff like that. But when we're designing cubes, we don't think about those things. We're just like, yeah, this effect is good. I want this creature. I don't care what its stat line is. I can't change its stat line because it's a unique creature and it's in there for the effect, not the stats. But without that abundance of choice, I can kind of say, oh, what if I played with this a little bit?
So see, I love to hear that you're thinking about that. I remember Shadows over Innistrad was the first limited set that I remember taking note of that. I remember in that set in particular, the gap between 3 toughness and 4 toughness was huge by way of creature power, by way of removal, that
Hmm.
your options it mattered so much when things crossed that threshold. And I think some designers have certainly done it, but I love that here it doesn't start with, well, what's the creature stat block and what ability does it have? It's, what you're working with here is what kind of token does this create? Which the power and toughness is part of the output rather than the input.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think when you think of the context of limited formats, you're also thinking about how removal lines up. Like I know back when I used to listen to all about podcasts about how removal lines up, they're like, oh, a braid hits 85% of creatures, so you should take it this highly.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if people are generally thinking about that for their cubes. I like to think that other people think about cube as much as I do. That makes me feel less strange. But
No, no, you're in good company here, Ollie.
yeah. But thinking about the base size of your creatures, I guess people often think about it one directionally. Like, I need a removal spell that can deal with 4 toughness, rather than like this color of creature should have access to 4 toughness or at 4 toughness at this mana value. So it's been an interesting thing where not having creatures means I get to look at it from both sides a little bit more. It's a little less mental overhead for me to do that.
So in a in a creatureless cube with no creature cards, how do games actually play out most of the time in your experience?
They play out somewhere between a normal game and like turbo EDH, not CEDH, but like Mindstone I think is just always a card you're happy to run here, or like any 2 mana ramp spell is just good. Not to say that the curves are super high because a lot of the decks that I see winning lately, I've intentionally tried to lower the curve a little bit. You see a lot of like 2 and 3 drops. The decks that are trying to attack with creatures are obviously trying to curve out with creatures, and the decks that are trying to build something or play control-y or do whatever are kind of like doing those things like a normal game of Magic. But yeah, I would say it doesn't feel too dissimilar from a normal game of Magic. There's certain archetypes in normal cube that don't really play a lot of creatures, and I think often it feels like if you saw a game of Creatureless, you might not notice at first that it doesn't have any creatures or that it comes from that cube, you know?
Yeah, I think that's maybe what I was angling at was that idea that perhaps just by glancing at the title, folks might be inclined to think that, oh, this is just going to be everybody building up their wall of enchantments or, building up their big storm turn. And there's a lot of face beating going on.
Yeah, you will usually see some sort of like creature damage coming in turn 3 or 4 from at least one of the decks. It's not blistering fast. Turn 3 or 4 is not super fast, but I like to think about it as there are some decks that are here to like build the grand machine, and then there are other decks that are here to make sure that doesn't happen. It's kind of like it's like the inverse of what I was saying before about mill and how that's exciting to me. Like now that doing the weird thing is the normal thing, the exciting thing is actually disrupting the new normal.
So we're just going on a long form cycle, and you will eventually find the thing to thwart the previous thing you found most exciting.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that was adding storm. I don't know.
So, Ollie, most cubes don't come with a warning, but I so appreciate your note in your overview for the uninitiated. The short synopsis of that note basically says, "Hey, be prepared to read and be prepared for things to function very differently." Did that come about as a result of feedback, or is that something you just kind of felt inspired to put in?
So that didn't come about from any feedback, or at least no direct feedback. Nobody said, "Hey, I wish you would tell me that duress is a better thoughtseize here."
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
Anybody thinking kind of gets that, but I never want to hear that somebody tried to draft one of my cubes and didn't get there and had a really bad time, you know? And so there are those concerns where I'm like, okay, if this is your first time drafting Creatureless, because it does appeal to people who are not heavily enfranchised. Like, if somebody who's new to the game hears Creatureless Cube, they're like, wow, that sounds really cool. Let me try that out. And I don't want them to be put in the deep end. So I want them to remember that, like, you will need some board presence, you will need removal, you will need ways to win the game. And so that little disclaimer is part of that, right? Where somebody might see Vanish into Memory and remember it from whenever it came out and be like, oh, I recognize the art on that card and the mana cost and the name. That card sucks. Um, and it's like, no, exile target creature, you draw cards equal to that card's power. At the beginning of the next upkeep, return that creature, and then you discard that many cards. But it never returns because it's a token. So it's
Yep.
just like a exile target creature, instant speed, draw 3 or whatever. And it's like the card is really good here compared to your normal context for it. So it's just a little reminder, honestly, to the more enfranchised people, don't pass over cards because you have these heuristics that say this card's bad. Just take a second, pause, make sure it's bad here before you pass it.
I think that's one of the challenges of any cube that leans into that radical recontextualization space, where you have to then look at each card afresh. Like you said earlier, is this the Snapcaster I know? You have to engage with that in a new way.
Right, and that's one of the things that makes it so exciting for me, and one of the things that, like, I have not designed toward the new player experience with this cube, but one of the things that I think is really cool is that sometimes the newbies do disproportionately well because they, by virtue of being newer to the game, have to recontextualize everything. They're always creating a new context for something because they don't have that old context. Versus somebody who's more seasoned, they're like, no, that card sucks. That card sucks. This one's good. Pack one, pick one, slam dunk. You know, and like there's this inherent balance to it because I want people to reconsider their cards. I think that's interesting. That's fun. Let's do something different. Let's do something new.
Do you think this kind of warning or suggestion to pivot framework is a valuable thing for other cubes to consider? Or do you think it's like because of this environment you want to lean into it more?
I think it's more for context shift cubes. I think normal cubes, people kind of can rely on their preconceived notions of cards and kind of just roll with that. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum. If that's the kind of magic that you enjoy playing, or like that's what you're used to, or that's what you're here for, like go for it. There are certain cubes that I'm just like, that doesn't interest me, or I'm never going to be good at that, or like whatever. And I think like this cube is that cube for a lot of people. And I just love that I get to provide this kind of cube, and that person who doesn't like this can click avoid and bring their own kind of cube, and I'll click avoid on theirs, and it's like we can respect each other as designers and like have fun, and I'm sure we'll find some other middle ground cube to play later and laugh about it, but not every cube has to be for everybody.
I think that's so valuable. And, as an optimist, I think that's a heartwarming idea to think, well, we'll find something that we all like. And it may not be this cube, it may not be that cube, but I think that's good.
Yeah, I enjoy some low curving interactive magic. I'm not just an EDH gamer, but I do like doing the fun thing, and this is the fun thing for me.
As we were talking here, Ollie, I was just struck by how much this is like an appetite for anything else, like food. It's like just because I'm not in the mood for a spicy meal today doesn't mean I never will be, or that nobody should like spicy food.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly it. This is my spicy cube, and if you have a tummy ache, then, let's play some Hopper or something, like, it's fine.
Thinking a little bit in the technical space for Creatureless Cube, talk about the move from designing around archetypes to designing around what you called packages. This is something you explained a little bit in your overview, but I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so this is similar to what I was talking about with the archetypes a little bit earlier, is that I think archetypes can be good as a starting point, and that's where I even started here, but I think it's more interesting for the drafters when they have to cobble something together. So one of the really cool examples of that here is life gain. I really never thought I was going to be able to fit a life gain archetype in here, and it's not something I was trying to force in, but it just so happened to work with other things. Like I have less than 10 cards that gain you life, I think. But that's all you need. You just need a little splash for it, right? Because I have cards that care about sacrificing. I have cards that care about artifact tokens. I have cards that care about game objects. So by adding a few cards that care about food, right? Like Trail of Crumbs, like Gormon's Talent, Scavenger's Talent is another one. By adding some of these cards that just kind of tangentially care about food, now I'm able to put in life gain payoffs because I'm saying, like, okay, someone can start with this deck that they're like, I think I'm going to be in artifacts. And then they see Trail of Crumbs. And they go, oh, well, one of the artifact tokens I can make can be food. And then they see Griffinary. It's like, okay, so I went from artifacts to food tokens to now life gain. Maybe later you pick up something where you pay life to draw cards, or Bolas's Citadel, or Aetherflux Reservoir, or it just opens up your options. And I love, you're telling this story with your draft where you're like, maybe staying the most open is not about picking the colorless card to start. Maybe staying the most open is about picking the card with the most possible directions. And even if you don't know what those directions are, just being open to using every part of the card. I think a lot about in this cube, and in Doubles and Synergy, which is another cube that I've been working on. I think a lot about how we're taught in grade school about how the Native Americans use every part of the animal that they hunt. It's kind of like that with a given card, right? Where if a card says like, whenever something happens, create a food token, and then whenever you sacrifice a food token, do this other thing. It's like, okay, well, it never said that you have to eat the food, right? Like I can sacrifice it to Oni Cult Anvil and then make a 1/1, and then these cards that care about sacrificing food are now all triggered all of a sudden. And so I like providing opportunities for people to think about cards in this different way rather than what's printed on the card, the like obvious level one use. If you can look at the higher use cases, the like ones that are more distanced from the obvious use of the card, you'll find that you can play in this really cool deck building space and a really cool draft navigation space. And so I have a bunch of these little packages to kind of support that way of drafting. And I think that makes for a really emergent and interesting draft, and then deck, and then gameplay.
When you describe them as packages, do you think of it as a distinct set of cards, or does that refer to something more general?
So packages are my way of essentially saying like mini archetypes. I once tried to lay out all of this terminology in an article, and once I was done, I was like, I don't like this. So I rewrote it another 10 pages, and I was like, no, I don't like this. So don't necessarily like follow what I'm doing, listeners, what I'm laying out here. But me personally, the way I conceptualize things is like a deck, when we're not talking about something that has been built from a draft of cards, a deck in a cube is like, oh, this is the Kiki Jiki deck. I draft Kiki Jiki and Splinter Twin and Pestromite and Zealous Conscripts and then a bunch of cheap counter magic and cantrips or whatever. That's the Kiki Jiki deck. You wouldn't call it an archetype because there's no like there aren't enough cards committed to that archetype in the cube to call it an archetype. And if there were, it would be busted. It would be not fun for anybody. So an archetype is like red black sacrifices an archetype. Kiki Twin or Sneak Attack or something like that is what I would consider a deck. And then something like, I have 8 cards that care about life gain or food tokens in Creatureless. That is a package because it's even smaller than what you're doing with other types of decks. The difference between a package of life gain, let's say in Creatureless, and a deck of Kiki Jiki is that the Kiki Jiki deck is prescriptive. You're drafting these specific pieces and things to support finding those pieces and not losing the game. Whereas with this package, it's like, hey, there are some food tokens and some life gain payoffs, and you can kind of do whatever you want with them. You can mix and match any number of them, and there's no specific way it's supposed to come together. Whereas if you don't get Kiki or Twin in your Kiki Twin deck, it
That's not
is
a very
not a
good
deck.
Kiki Twin
Yeah,
deck.
it's not a deck anymore. Whereas if you don't get Trail of Crumbs and Gormon's Talon in your food deck, that's not necessarily make or break. Nobody cares because it's not a deck. It's just like a package of cards. So I like to think of a package as like, I suppose, a micro archetype.
And that's really interesting. I think the way you phrased that idea of a deck feeling prescriptive, where a package may be a more descriptive option, where one is pushing you into a lane and the other is opening up more paths.
Yeah, and that's why I think the comparison to archetype is more apt, where it's just like a really, really tiny archetype, I suppose. Going back to the black red sacrifice archetype, there might be key cards, but if you don't get your Mayhem Devil, if you don't get your Judith or whatever, like you'll still get enough cards that say sacrifice on them where your red black sacrifice deck will come together. And I think a package is kind of like that, but on a smaller scale. There's no like you need this card to make it work. It's just kind of these are the cards that go together in a certain way.
So, Ollie, you are a prolific designer. You've engaged with a lot of different projects. What design principles from the Creatureless Cube do you carry over into other projects you're working on?
I think one thing that is kind of a through line between all of my projects is that I really want that radical recontextualization. Every project that I do, I'm doing something a little bit different with it. I have gone on record before on social media saying that, like, there's a lot of cube space for things to do without emblems. I do stand beside that. Not all of my cubes have emblems, but they're all doing something weird. Creatureless has no creatures. Doubleton has 2 of every card. I have a 2-headed giant cube that drafts in a weird way, but that's not really the selling point. The selling point is that I have crammed so many cards that don't care about you as a player in there. So it's like whenever a creature attacks, creatures you control get +1/+1 or something like that, where it's like you and your other head are working together a lot more than you would otherwise in a two-headed giant. And so I'm just always trying to look for ways to emphasize what makes cards unique. I was playing a lot of this roguelite card game, not Slay the Spire, unfortunately, but
You wait, you mean there are more?
yeah, yeah, there's more than Slay the Spire and Balatro, but I was playing this other one a few weeks ago, and I was like, man, I wish I was playing Magic right now. And I was like, what would that look like? Like, could I design a roguelite single player or multiplayer cube? And so I gave it a shot. I did a test draft once. It was fun. It needs a lot of work and it's not, I don't have the time for it right now. But in that one, in roguelike games, you're always drawing up at the start of your turn. So it's like, okay, all of a sudden, cards that have this major setback, like major downside of discard a card, do a thing, are now suddenly great because now you're cycling. Like whatever you don't like in your
Yeah.
hand, you're discarding and drawing back up. So all these cards that just really are not good and are not played anywhere, they're like from 20 years ago, are suddenly given new life. All these like bad ones that say like discard a card, target creature gets +1/+1 and first strike till end of turn. Like that card's actually good now. And I think that's really cool.
No, I love that, and especially in that space of radical recontextualization, there are so many different directions to go that it feels like each person has their own take on what that may look like, and you've had many takes on what
Yeah.
that may look like.
I have tried designing board games before and it was interesting and fulfilling and very difficult, but it's really hard to find people to like play test with or enjoy it.
Mm,
At a certain point in prototyping, I was like, wow, I have a free night and I don't want to play a board game. I don't want to play a video game. I don't want to like work on my game. I just want to play my game for fun. And I think Cube is a lot like that where we're all designing our little games, but we're also this like really huge and friendly and robust community of games designers. And we all just love to play this game. So it's so cool to be able to design these things with each other, for each other, play them with each other. It's just like the cards are this common design language that you don't really get other places. And maybe it's that I didn't get super far into those communities, but it's just so cool that like on any given day, I can just go on the computer and read what one of several games designers are doing with their cube today, or just go onto Discord and go into one of 10 different channels and be like, hey, let's talk about this game that this person's designing or I'm designing, or can I have feedback? It's just so cool to, I don't know. I feel really grateful that we have this common design language of Magic that we can just build these little games off of.
there's something special about being in a creative space that is encouraging for other people to be pursuing the same craft.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like I have to pay people to play my game. Like, we all just want to play Magic, and it's like, you need a new cube play tested? Like, yeah, let's do it. Of course.
And it's not competitive generally in the same way. Like, you don't have to be better than somebody else. You don't have to out design someone. You get to explore that with them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something really special about it.
So, what advice would you offer to other designers as they are at different places on their own journey?
One of the most important pieces of advice I can offer is that building a cube is not like building an EDH deck. So, in EDH, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about this for everybody who hates EDH but loves Cube out there. You're going to have to listen to me talk for a minute. Um, there's a lot of them.
This is a good sign when you start an idea by apologizing.
I, you know, they'll get over it. But so for EDH, like everybody's putting in their 100 cards and they like want to feel like a genius. They're expressing themselves in the design of the deck. And playing is almost like this secondary thing that kind of doesn't have as much to do with like, hey, check out this deck that I built. Like, isn't it sweet? Like, isn't it cool? Don't you like that I put that card in? And like, there's this kind of ego tied up with it. And I think cube design is actually much different. Cube design scratches a similar design itch where it's like, I'm going to put all these cards together, and it doesn't matter which ones are left in the box. It doesn't matter which ones are left in your deck after you're done building it. They're all going to work together, and that's cool. But it's not about the ego. It's about like you as a cube designer should seek to make it so that your drafters A fail as little as possible, B have as much fun as possible, and C feel really smart once they're done drafting. Like my main goal as a cube designer is to create this environment where people can come in and be like, Ollie, check out my deck. I am a mad genius. Like nobody would have ever thought to put together the cards in the way that I thought to put them together. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like, yes, I actually have never seen this before. And that is so cool. At events, I get people coming up to me all the time, like showing me their deck, like telling me about their deck, like telling me stories about what their deck did. And like, that's the reward, right? It's not about me being the smartest cube designer and building the coolest cube of all time and like showing off how amazing I am. It's that I'm able to like fill this sandbox with toys that like maybe there's a little bit intent on my part of like, yeah, like if you put that truck with that dinosaur, like something cool is gonna happen. But also like so much of it is just like, I'm just gonna dump these all in here and I'm gonna let you figure it out. You know, I don't want to say like, oh, this card's gonna be a really sick infinite combo. I'm gonna put that in there. It's like I want you, the drafter, to figure that out. And so being a cube designer is kind of this like labor of love, like this thing that you're providing for your drafters. It's not, you aren't the one who should feel clever when you're designing a cube. You're the one who lets the players feel clever. And that is your reward.
And what an uplifting perspective. Really well said.
Thank you.
Ollie, as we trend toward wrapping up here, I get to ask one of my favorite questions, which is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would it be and who would you have do the illustration?
Okay. So I have thought about this. I've thought about this every time I've heard somebody answer it. And I'm always like, huh, did they misunderstand the question? And it turns out I am the one who misunderstood the question. So I'm going to tell you what I thought you asked, and then with your blessing, I would like to answer it in my own way.
It
Um,
would only be fair to allow you to do so, yeah.
so I thought when you asked this question, I thought you're asking people like what their invitational card would be, but
Oh.
that's not what you're asking. You're asking for a promo card.
I historically asked it as like if you could have a card printed as a judge promo, but then judge promos have been discontinued and nobody really knows what that means anymore. So
Yeah, I'm
the rules are
sorry.
all gone. No, no, no. It's fine.
Bummer mood. um, Okay, but so let's say that I did get this card printed for me. I didn't really know this card existed until really recently. My answer was going to be Atris, but
Oh
I
yeah,
found
Oracle of Half Truths.
yes, my friends will hear if I get them to listen to this. They're going to hear that and think it's really funny because I love telling little like harmless lies. Um, but what I'm going to choose instead is Curator of Destinies. Do you know this card?
Ooh, I know Curator of Mysteries.
So this one's from Foundations. I'll just read it out for you and the listener because I didn't even know it existed. It's a 5/5 for 6, 4 blue blue. This spell can't be countered, flying. When this creature enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile into your hand and the other pile into your graveyard. So it's kind of like an Atris, but I'm the one who gets to be tricky. It's like Hostile Negotiations, which is another card that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
I'm sure that this comes as no surprise after telling you that, like, I love Mill and I love going diagonal and all these other things. there are bluffs in Magic, right? Like, generally, bluffing is attacking. There are certain times where you're leaving mana up or tapping in a certain way that can be considered a bluff. But, like, this type of effect is so juicy for me. Like, I love separating things into a face down and face up pile and being like, yeah, I guess here you go. And the opponent just has to be like, am I being massively bluffed? Like, why am I looking at just lands here? Or
Yeah.
why are there no lands here when Ollie missed their last land drop? Or there's just like, it's so rich and juicy, and I love making people make decisions about face up and face down piles. It's so exciting to me.
It's like, the scene from Princess Bride, right? Like, I clearly can't choose the stack in front
Yeah,
of you.
exactly, exactly. And it's just like it's super fun. I love that. So my card would be Curator of Destinies until they make this a legendary version. And the artist would be Benjamin E. I don't know if you know him. There's this like promo art of Judith the Scourge Diva. It was like a serialized one. It's like a side profile of her, and it's so beautiful. Like, I'm obsessed with this card, and if it was like a little bit cheaper, I almost bought a serialized one, just because 'cause I'm obsessed with this art. He's also done a lot of, like, Strixhaven, the, like, Mystical Archives and other things, or, like, some of the other profiles of Magic characters, the ones where it was, like, super close up of their face.
Yeah, the Modern Horizon, or sorry, Commander
Yeah.
Masters profiles.
Yes. Yep. Anyway, Benjamin E., fantastic artist. We're probably going to be seeing more from him in the near future. Called shot. Y'all will know his name in a couple years. Like, that would be my pick for who gets to make me look cool.
That's awesome. Before we wrap up here, you, in addition to being a designer, also have helped organize and run the Boston Cube Party. Do you wanna say a little bit about that program?
Yeah. Boston Cube Party is coming up this April. We will be sold out by the time this podcast goes out. So I don't need to know the specific dates. I I think it's the 12th and 13th. Don't worry, Gwen, if you're hearing this. I'm sorry, it's in my calendar, I promise. But yeah, so Boston Cube Party is a thing that Gwen Decker of Cube Cobra fame and Lone Cube fame and I put together last year. We got just short of 90 people last year. This year we were shooting for 128. We posted that we had 10 tickets left, and Bones, Judge Bones, I love you as well, but Bones was like, "Ollie, don't you think it was misleading that you said we might sell out today or tomorrow? There's 10 tickets." And I was like, "I don't know, Bones." Within half an hour, we had sold out, and by the end of
Amazing.
the day, we had a 30-person wait list, and Bones was like, "Oops, I, sure am eating my words now." So, the response for Boston Cube Party Year 2 is fantastic. We were able to increase the cap from 128 to 200 now, and so we've sold that out. So, thank you, everybody. If you've already bought a ticket and you're listening to this, I'm so happy that we get to just have this little event that I guess is not so little anymore, and just kind of contribute to the cube community. We have multiple people flying out from the West Coast. We have like Aqua coming out from the West Coast. We have people coming from all over. Like Bones obviously is coming from a far way, but also travels to all of these anyway. Yeah, we have people from Wisconsin, from the whole Eastern Seaboard. It's really exciting to be able to do this, and it's really cool to be able to provide it in kind of in the same way that I was talking about providing a cube before, where like it's just my job to support everybody else, to give them the space to have their fun. Like, it's so cool to be able to do that in a literal physical way as well. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to do year 2 now. Year 3, who knows? I'm feeling much better year 3 now than I was about year 2 this time last year. But yeah, if I made a dream list of like the cubes I would want to see at an event in an ideal perfect world, I think that list would look almost exactly like the list of cubes that we have for Boston Cube Party. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, if you don't have a ticket, we have a wait list. Check it out, bostoncubeparty.com. We are also on Blue Sky. Check us out.
So the 2 takeaways I'm getting from this are, 1, register early for next year, and,
Mhm.
uh, and 2, that there's a space and a passion for this sort of thing. that people have enjoyed playing Cube and want to get together to do it. And that's really exciting that you get to be at the epicenter of some of that.
Yeah, I'm not an organizer or like someone who does these sorts of things by nature, but you know, be the change you want to see. And like, I was just like, hey, I wish we had an event out here, and we made it happen. And there's a whole community of people who are like willing to help you make it happen if you're out there listening and you want to throw a cube event yourself. We almost have a formula at this point. So like, yeah, you can do it, and I highly recommend just getting people together in the same room to play Magic. That's what it's all about.
Well, Ollie, you are a rock star, and I'm so grateful that we had the chance to sit down and talk like this. Just a joy to go through. If folks want to connect, maybe that's about event organizing, maybe that's about the Creatureless Cube or so many of your other cool projects, where should we point them?
The easiest way to get in touch with me is probably on Blue Sky. Ollie at bostoncubeparty.com on Blue Sky. I prefer to talk on Discord, but I'm a million places on Discord. You can probably just go into a cube server that you enjoy talking in and just at Beaks, and I'll probably come up. I'm probably in that server already. Um,
Just summon you from the from the
yeah,
Cube Discord.
I'm like, wait, I'm in this Discord. It's in a folder and a folder and a folder, but yeah. Um, so yeah, feel free to reach out on Blue Sky. Feel free to message me on Discord or at me on Discord. I'm always happy to talk cube. It's my favorite thing in the world to talk about. So hit me up.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. This has been just a treat for me, and I'm looking forward to whatever opportunity comes next to connect in the future.
It's been a treat for me as well. It was great getting to sit and talk with you, and I hope we get to do this again sometime soon.